Before we dive in, quick roll call. Tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. You will see why the clocks matter in a moment. The first thing you notice in the surviving prints from the Ledger Run Glass Studio is not the faces. It is the way the light behaves the same way in pictures that were supposedly taken years apart. The same high window on the left, the same chipped baseboard, the same hairline crack in the backdrop that wanders like a small river behind the sitter's shoulders. If you lay the 12 family portraits we will talk about on a table and align the margins, the sunlight lands on the same button of a different father's coat every time. That is not an accident of nature. That is a studio system. The sign over the door said, "See Baxter, portraits while you wait." Baxter used glass plates, 6.5 by 8.5, stored in numbered sleeves. He did not work alone. His assistant, a woman who signed receipts as L. Wren, kept a ledger of poses and prop selections. The ledger has lines that will matter for the rest of this story. 2 chairs, 1 standing cradle, 1 school slate, and 1 Sunday coat, size small. The Sunday coat appears in 4 separate family portraits from 4 surnames that do not share a census address. The coat is not the trick. The trick is how the subjects are arranged to make new lives look believable. People came for honest reasons. A boy about to leave on the orphan trains, pinned to a new surname and a destination card. A couple who needed proof of a household to claim relief after a flood that never reached their street. A man who said his wife would not sit for a picture, then returned the next week with a different woman in the same borrowed hat, both insisting they were Mrs. Ellery for the purpose of a policy form. Baxter photographed what stood in front of him, but he also kept a rack of faces he could hire for the afternoon. The rack was not literal. It was a shelf of card frames. Each frame had a name and a role: auntie, neighbor, farmhand, boarder. If a family arrived missing a piece, no baby to make them look established, no elder to legitimize an inheritance, no second child to qualify for a rail company family rate. Baxter would look to L. Wren. She would go 3 doors down and return with someone who had already played a cousin in last month's album. Wren paid cash, 50 cents an hour, and a photograph of themselves to take home. The glass plate captured what the eye wanted to see, a complete scene. On paper, a town grows the same way. You can tell which sitters were rentals by their shoes. Ledger Run had clay that climbs the soles and freezes there. People who walked from the post road to the studio tracked it in. The rental relatives wore studio boots with clean edges and a nicked heel that repeats in picture after picture. You can also tell by a tiny oversight. The same ribbon on an infant's bonnet appearing in 4 unrelated homes. Wren kept careful notes, but she reused whatever looked gentle and trustworthy. If this sounds like a petty fraud, stop here and count the documents that chain to a single photograph. A family card to the rail clerk for a discount. A marriage record filed with a studio print as proof. A claim form on a life policy that required a household image. A church roll, a school enrollment, a relief application after a storm. When people needed to exist in identical ways across multiple ledgers, the studio provided a picture that all those offices would recognize. Nothing in the image said the aunt was rented, and nothing on the glass plate registered the fee that changed hands out of frame. On the workbench beside the camera, Baxter kept a sequence book. It is a simple list, plate numbers, names as given, and a checkbox marked proofs delivered. But on several dates the book contains extra marks, a small dot next to the box. Those dots line up with pictures where the light falls exactly the same as a portrait from another surname taken a year later. A dot appears when the plate is remade with different sitters and the same arrangement. Not a reprint, a replay. The props tell a cleaner story than any confession. There is a wooden cradle that seems to grow with the town's babies. In early pictures, the cradle is half-framed, a bit shallow. In later pictures, when the supposed infant is different and the date stamp claims a different season, the same cradle has a riser placed underneath to meet a taller child who is pretending to be younger. You can see the riser if you know to look, an extra seam of wood beneath the rocking shoe. A cradle that ages backward to accommodate a new family is a quiet signal that the picture is keeping time for someone else. Why would anyone do this? Because Ledger Run began as a switchyard without a town, a line item on a map to justify a rail spur. A studio can build what a survey cannot. A photograph proves domesticity better than a plat. If you show a railroad that families have settled, there is reason to extend the line. If you show a county board that households exist, there is reason to assign funds. If you show a life insurer that a man had dependents, there is reason to pay after an accident under a carload of lumber that no one can find a delivery slip for. The studio's pictures were not only keepsakes, they were keys. Baxter's assistant, L. Wren, understood the human side. She knew which children could hold still and which would not cry if handed to a stranger for 2 minutes. She knew that people are loyal to the truth they have paid for. If a widow hired a neighbor to stand in as a sister so the picture could convince a clerk, the widow would not later unmake that fiction when it helped her qualify for a coal allotment in winter. The lie hardens as the ink dries. By the time the glass negative is shelved, the town has one more aunt, one more uncle, one more cousin, and the map maker has one more reason to draw a line. You can follow one face through the set. The girl with the chipped tooth and the dark braid appears first as a neighbor's daughter, age perhaps 10, holding a slate. She appears again as a cousin 2 years later, though the braid has the same tie and the slate carries the same chalk line. The chalk is not handwriting, it is a horizontal mark Baxter used to test his focus on dark clothing. The line repeats because the prop was not wiped. The girl appears a third time as a visiting niece, now placed further back to blur the chipped tooth. She is paid to be a person others will later claim to remember. People will swear she attended a picnic. People will swear she lived on Cedar Street. If enough households stick her into their stories, the town will supply her a history she never lived. There is a photograph with 5 people labeled as the Paris family. The father's collar is a mill worker's stiff type. The mother's hat is a studio hat pinned at the crown. 2 children stand between them, and an older woman sits with a lace shawl that belongs to the studio trunk. Now look closely at the older woman's hands. In a separate print from a different surname, those hands with their crooked index finger rest on the same cradle. If you hold the prints side by side and match the cropped edge of the backdrop crack, the woman's chair has not moved. Baxter moved the people. The chair and the lights stayed. We talked to a descendant who had one of the pictures framed over her table. She did not know her great-grandmother rented herself as a neighbor in exchange for cash. She only knew that the older woman in the picture, called Aunt Seraphine in the family, never appears in any other photographs. When she took the frame down, the cardboard backing had the studio stamp for Ledger Run and a pencil note. Seraphine, second seat, good cheek. That sounds like cruelty. It is a casting note. Wren was casting families the way a theater casts a play. You might wonder whether any of this would hold up if anyone cared to examine it. For a long time, no one did. Studios everywhere dressed poor people a little better for their portraits and disguised dents in the walls with painted backdrops. Ledger Run went 1 degree further. The studio supplied people to complete pictures and then let those pictures complete documents. Officials did not compare faces across applications. They compared names and signatures. If a birth date was consistent enough and a surname matched the spelling in the studio ledger, the paper process rolled on. And because rail discounts and relief vouchers were small, no single clerk had a reason to call a halt. The pattern only becomes visible in the aggregate. When you fan out the studio's cabinet cards on a table, you start seeing the repetition that a single family album disguises. The same tiny paint flake missing from the trim. The same curtain tassel always tied on the right. The same scuff on the floor where the second chair legs sit, scuffing deeper through supposedly separate years. The studio pictures do not show time passing. They show roles being filled. What about the people who were hired as relatives? Ledger Run did not have a large pool. The switchyard employed men who came and went. The post road brought in travelers. The stable boys were too young. So Wren built a circle of reliable sitters, a washerwoman good with babies, a schoolboy tall enough to pass for a cousin, a retired brakeman who looked like a grandfather in his Sunday shirt. Each was told to look into the lens and think of nothing in particular. Each was reminded not to appear in 2 shoots on the same day. They were not part of a conspiracy in the melodramatic sense. They were part of a small economy in a place that had not learned to say no to useful fictions. One day the studio received a special request from a man who did not live in Ledger Run. He came on the morning freight and spoke like a clerk. He placed on the counter a printed form with a policy number and needed, he said, a household photograph to release a payment after an accident. He needed a wife and a child in the frame. He offered a fee and asked that the child be the same one who had appeared in the studio window display last month. That means he had examined the window cards. He knew the look he wanted because a previous fake had already convinced someone else. Wren went to the shelf, selected the Sunday coat, and sent for the girl with the chipped tooth. Baxter loaded a clean plate and steadied the tripod. The clerk looked at the light and asked whether it could be arranged as it had been in the window picture. Baxter tilted the shade. The light fell on the same coat button. The clerk signed the receipt without giving his real name. Afterward, Wren wrote a narrow note in the margin of the ledger. Repeat light for release. On the next page, a similar note appears. Repeat shawl with niece. The phrasing is workmanlike. It is also how you maintain continuity when you are manufacturing evidence that will pass through offices that never meet the people in it. If you think this is too calculated for a small studio, look at any theater troupe's prop list or any photographer's pose guide. Baxter had built a technical routine. Wren kept it running. In a back room, the studio stored glass plates in crates separated by straw. The labels are plain dates. Some plates are clean at the edges, with tidy blacking. Others show finger smudges in the emulsion where someone lifted a plate before it dried. That someone may have been Wren. People talk about photographers as artists, but in a place like Ledger Run, the assistant's hands made the system. She kept the faces from overlapping too obviously. She tracked who had played a neighbor in May so they would not return as an aunt in June and step on their own story. She developed a courtesy known only to the studio. When a rented relative wanted their own keepsake, the studio made a second contact print without the family name on the back. It would simply say, "Friend." You can still find a few tucked into Bibles with no surnames at all. If there is a moral alarm in any of this, it shows up in a small stack of rejects. These are prints with an X cut through the corner so they could not be sold. In one, a baby's head is turned away, and the mother looks impatient. The rented aunt is mid-blink. In another, the father appears twice blurred, because Baxter tried to shorten the exposure, and the man shifted his weight. In the third, something else goes wrong. The girl with the braid is placed too close to the lens. The chipped tooth is unmistakable. The tie is the same. And yet the surname penciled on the backing is one we will encounter much later on a gravestone that belongs to a family that swears she was theirs. The reject picture shows how thin the boundary was between a borrowed face and a fixed history. The studio did not advertise rentals. It advertised packages. A portrait for the mantel, an album with 6 views, a household proof stamped for official use. That stamp is a wooden block with the words Ledger Run Portrait Proof curved around the town name like a banner. If you look at the ink carefully, the R in Run is chipped. The chip appears on every proof, a small bite that becomes the studio's fingerprint. You will see that chip on rail discount forms, on school registrations, on relief vouchers, and once on a burial record for a person nobody remembers meeting. When officials saw the chip, they trusted the image. They learned to trust the stamp the way a traveler trusts a ticket punch. If you are watching from a city that takes its streets and door numbers for granted, it may be difficult to imagine how a studio could shape the identity of a place. But when a town begins as a siding and a name on a map, the first artifacts to prove it exists are not always deeds and charters. They are photographs. People hang them, refer to them, bring them to offices, point to them to settle disagreements, and copy names from their backs. A studio with a steady light and a habit of filling chairs can do more to outline a community than a surveyor with a chain. You might think someone would complain. In fact, they did, once. A woman wrote to the rail office arguing that the family in a picture used for a discount was not a family at all, and that she recognized the supposed aunt as a laundress who lived alone. The office filed the letter and sent a polite reply that pictures were sufficient proof, no inquiry required. The studio sold 2 more household proofs that week. The laundress bought fabric for a winter coat. There is one last detail from the first chapter of this story that belongs here because it won't make sense later if we leave it out. Baxter kept a small box under the counter labeled tokens. The tokens were round cardboard discs with numbers written in blue pencil. Clients drew one at the door. The number matched a pose in Baxter's sequence book. Pose 3. Father seated, mother standing, children between, cradle right. Pose 7. All standing, neighbor seated. Pose 12. Elder seated, couple behind, child held. The token system sped up the line on busy days and standardized the images in a way that looks like efficiency until you realize it also standardized the lies. When the clerk asked for a household picture to release a payment, Wren did not discuss sincerity. She handed him token 3. He nodded as if he had seen it before. He had. If you want to understand why a picture in a frame could become a life on paper, you have to stand behind the post office counter at Ledger Run and watch the mail arrive. The sacks come off the mixed freight with the same dust as the feed and the fence wire. The clerk slices the rope, tips the canvas, and letters slip into the pigeonholes with a sound like cards shuffling. Names are not stable here. They are ambitions. The postmaster learns them in layers, the way a river learns the banks it will keep. His name in the registry book is Abel Hart, acting postmaster, appointed after the previous man left for a job at the main yard. He is not romantic about letters. He is exact about them. He knows which hands press too hard on the downstroke of an R, which widows use violet ink, which men fold from the top instead of the side, because they learned on ledgers rather than stationery. He keeps a small drawer under the counter that he calls the skeleton drawer. It holds the things that make a picture into a document. Blank change of address forms, a rubber stamp for received, a razor for trimming the edges of photographs that come in glued to requests, a folded copy of an orphan placement schedule that was never meant to stay in a small-town post office, but did, because everything that needs to become real eventually passes under his hand. On the day the first orphan train route splits for Ledger Run, Abel is ready in the unglamorous way of a man who reads circulars. The Children's Aid Society has sent a broadside with dates and towns. A clerk at the division headquarters has red-penciled Ledger Run as a stop if the siding can show reliable households willing to take children. Reliable is a word that photographs can help invent. A household proof with a studio stamp goes farther with a distant office than a letter from a neighbor. Abel knows this because the rail agent told him, and the rail agent heard it from a claimsman with a policy book and a quota. The first envelope that matters is addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Eli Paris, Cedar Street, Ledger Run. There is no Cedar Street. There is a cedar spur, which is a fenced line with 2 shacks and a yard of scrap ties. Abel writes in the margin of his registry memoranda that Cedar Street is accepted usage. He writes it twice, so the second time looks like confirmation. When the Paris envelope goes into the pigeonhole, the town grows a street by force of routine. The letter contains a notice of eligibility to receive a child from the next eastbound train, provided the household can show 2 adults, a bed, and a means of support. The notice suggests a photograph. The notice is written like a kindness. It is also a test. Abel does not care to fail tests others invent for his town. He unlocks the skeleton drawer, takes out a stack of cards titled Certificate of Residence, and stamps 3 with the town's name. He fills 1 with the Paris surname, which he has only seen on a studio backing board. He fills another with the surname Ellery, which he has seen twice in the pigeonholes with no replies. He fills a third with a name that will be useful later. Then he locks the drawer again and keeps the cards in his pocket until the right people appear. A woman appears that afternoon. She is the laundress from the studio pictures, the one hired as an aunt. She is carrying a notice for rail discount and wants it stamped to match her new address. Abel asks for proof of residence. She slides a cabinet card across the counter, the studio proof with the chipped R in Run. He stamps the discount form without comment and watches where she puts the card when she leaves. She folds it into a Bible with a place cut out for it. It sits where a family history might have gone. He notes the address she gives him and pencils a dot next to the pigeonhole where a letter marked for Cedar Street now waits. In the weeks before the orphan train date, dead letters multiply. Some are returns from men who left without telling the office. Others are letters addressed to names invented in the studio for one purpose and then abandoned. The dead letter log grows a column of familiar handwriting. Abel starts using those names. If a letter comes for a Henry Lyle, and he has a Henry Lyle in the log, whose previous letter came back stamped unclaimed, he will hold the new one a little longer. If a woman comes in and asks whether anything has arrived for her sister, he will ask which sister, and whichever name she tries first, will tell him which fiction is currently in circulation. He is not trying to catch anyone. He is mapping where the paper goes after it leaves his hand. When the train does arrive, it does not look like a moral lesson. It looks like children lined up with tags, watched by a matron who has done this enough times to keep order with a glance. The rail agent pins a notice on the depot wall. The town has 30 minutes to present itself as humane and ready. Couples step forward. A few men come alone and say their wives could not make the walk. The studio proof cards appear like tickets at a theater. Abel stands where the matron will see him if she raises her head. He has already filled one certificate of residence with the Paris name and a Cedar Street address. He watches as the laundress who plays the aunt appears with a man who says he is Eli Paris. The name was plucked from a picture. The man's collar is from the same trunk as the other pictures. It does not matter. The matron looks at the stamp, not the collar. What matters to Abel is where the child sleeps that night. He writes the child's name in his registry memorandum with the word delivered next to it, like a registered parcel. He writes the new surname after the first. If the boy is Thomas Lyle when he steps off the train and Elias Paris by supper, the book contains both. His ledger is not moral either. It is directional. It points into the town's paper future and asks how steady the route will be. The orphan ledger that the matron uses has neat columns: name at intake, age, sending institution, destination town, intended guardian. Abel borrows the ledger for 10 minutes while the depot clears on the pretext of copying the names for the rural route lists. In those 10 minutes, he notes which families produced studio proofs. 4 of the 6. He notes which of those 4 had mail in the last month returned as unclaimed. 2 of the 4. He understands the new risk. The train has given the town real children with real needs, anchored to households that might be paper sound and soil weak. The next part is where the post office becomes a tool, not just a witness. Abel builds mail where none would naturally go. He addresses letters to the new surnames and sends them from the counter to the roots with a penciled X on the corner that only he understands. If a letter comes back with the X still on it, he knows the family is not home when the carrier calls. If the X is smudged and the letter returns stamped, attempted, not known, he knows someone opened it and decided not to be that name that day. The tiny marks he makes on the corners of letters become a private census. He does not share it with officials. He uses it to decide which names to stabilize. Stabilizing a name is work. It means teaching the roots to find a person by the name they need to keep. It means adding that name to the rural directory board on the wall, even if the board is supposed to list only paying box holders. It means telling the carrier that a letter addressed to Mrs. Ellery may be claimed by the laundress if she brings the studio proof card. It means looking the other way when a man picks up mail as Paris on Tuesday and as Hartwell on Friday, provided both envelopes lead to the same child's dinner. The skeleton drawer gains a new item, a small notebook with 3 columns: given name, chosen name, document that will carry the chosen name forward. Abel cannot control the pictures. He can direct the weight of paper. If the chosen name appears on a church roll and on a school list and on a mail order for a winter coat, the name hardens. If it only appears once, on a rail discount slip, it will wash away at the first argument over a bill. He begins to steer widows toward the same chosen name on every form, and he refuses to stamp a proof for a policy release if the surname does not match the school entry. He tells people it is regulation. It is not. It is maintenance. The mail teaches him who is likely to disappear. Men who take the night shift at the scales promise to come for their envelopes and then do not. Women who appear only with a household proof and never with a bill or a circular tend to move on before spring. The children who attend school carry notes that betray who feeds them. He keeps all of this in his head and in the little notebook. If a child starts receiving letters from a relative in another town, he notices whether the relative uses the old name or the new. If the relative uses the old name, he makes a point of using the new when he greets the child at the counter. He is not lying to the child. He is underwriting the present tense. People come to him for favors, and he pretends they are requests. A man asks whether Abel can forward mail addressed to Hartsfield to Cedar Street. Abel says there is no Hartsfield and writes Cedar Street on the back in pencil so the carrier will not be confused. A woman asks if a letter can be held until Friday because the person it is addressed to does not exist until payday. Abel says the mail is the mail and then places the envelope in the skeleton drawer until Friday. The drawer is not just paper, it is time. The orphan ledger returns the next month with corrections. One child is moved from the Paris household to another couple 2 blocks closer to the depot. The reason is not written. The matron simply notes a new guardian. Abel copies the change, but leaves the first entry in his own book with a dotted line. He walks past the studio that afternoon and sees the girl with the chipped tooth in the window display again, this time as a sister to a boy who looks enough like the child from the train to be mistaken for him at a glance. The proof card in the window has the chipped R. The town knows a system when it sees one. The post office grows quieter in winter. People stay home and send for things from catalogs. The address plates in the railway post office car carve the town's new names into metal. Once you punch a name into a plate and start using it to label sacks and bundles, it becomes expensive to undo. Abel orders new plates cautiously. He waits until a name survives 3 months of his corner X test without bouncing back. Then he asks for the plate. He keeps the broken plates in the skeleton drawer. He tells himself that the bones in the drawer are only letters and steel. There is a boy who starts coming in to collect the mail for 3 surnames. He is quick and polite and looks down when addressed. The tags on the letters show that 3 distant churches have added the family to a prayer list. Abel asks which name the teacher uses. The boy says the teacher calls him Elias in class and Lyle when she forgets. Abel takes out the little notebook and draws a clean line through Lyle. He tells the boy that, for the male, he will be Elias. The boy nods as if he has been given a coat. At some point in early spring, the matron sends a form asking whether Ledger Run can take 2 more children if the train oversells the next town. The form has blank spaces that invite the town to perform competence. Abel fills them with the names that will behave. He avoids the men who split their mail between names. He avoids the women who only exist when a studio card is on the counter. He lists the laundress and the retired brakeman. He knows the laundress rents herself as an aunt. He also knows she pays for coal on time and never lets a notice sit. The brakeman does not change his name for anyone. Stability is not virtue here. It is a habit. The last thing he adds to the system is simple. He begins to staple studio proofs to the backs of school registration cards and church rolls when people bring them to the counter for address stamps. He does not have the authority to do this. He does it anyway. A picture that has already convinced a clerk once will convince a different clerk a second time, provided the chipped R is visible and the names match. He is building a belt across institutions so that if one story slips, the others will hold. He is not proud of the tactic. He is proud of the results. The mail moves. The children stay. The names on the boxes stop changing every week. On a Wednesday afternoon, a man with a clerk's voice asks whether the postmaster can verify that Eli Paris and his wife are in receipt of correspondence at Cedar Street. Abel says that the mail is confidential, and then, after a pause, says yes. He stamps a small certificate that is not a real postal form, but looks like one to anyone who has never worked behind a counter. The man thanks him and leaves on the afternoon freight. Abel opens the skeleton drawer and moves the broken plates to one side so the certificate book will lie flat. He does not like the weight he feels in his chest when the drawer closes. He opens it again and takes the weight out. He places it on the counter where he can see it. It is only paper. The switchyard scales at Ledger Run are a platform of planks and iron that look honest because they are heavy. Rail cars roll on, the beam drops, a ribbon of paper bites out a number, and men call it truth because numbers look like facts even when they are only settings. By day, the scale clerk reads gross and tear off the brass plates riveted to the car frames, subtracts with a pencil he keeps behind his ear, and tears off a weight ticket for the conductor. By night, the man in charge is not a clerk. He is the operator who minds the telegraph, unlocks the scale shack, and keeps a second book because the first one never catches what happens after the last freight clears. His name is Merritt Cole, night operator, telegrapher by certificate, scale tender by necessity. The company pays him one wage with split duties. He copies traffic orders in Morse for trains he will never see in daylight, flips the lantern for late arrivals, and reads the scale with a patience that makes people believe in balance. He is not sentimental. He is particular. He can tell when a car's tear plate has been sanded and restamped. He knows that a 36-foot gondola with a patched floor does not weigh what the plate claims, and that if the beam hesitates a half-inch and settles light, someone has lifted the lever under the deck to shave 200 pounds off the net. He knows because he can hear the lever's pin kiss the bracket. The first time Merritt writes a note in his extra book is a Tuesday after midnight, winter. Car NKNV 18275 rolls across labeled Feed. The beam prints a gross that, minus the plate's tear, yields a net of 54 200 pounds. He pulls the chalk from the peg and marks 54.2 on the sill so the yardman can see it in lantern light. When the conductor signs the ticket, his pen hand does a little hook on the final Y of Perry. The signature line says, Eli Perry Crew. There is no Eli Perry on any day crew. The hook on the Y will show up again and again. Merritt copies the ticket number in his extra book and draws a small hook beside it. Phantom wages do not begin as envelopes stuffed under tables. They begin as weights. The yard's payroll shares a bonus pool pegged to ton miles moved after dark. The heavier the cars on a given night, the fatter the pool for the men named on the call sheet. If you can make the net heavier without lifting a single extra sack, you can make the bonus swell. You do it by shaving tear, by claiming the car is lighter empty than it is, which makes it look heavier when full. You do it by reusing a tear from a sister car with a clean plate and a generous figure. You do it by writing a number you know the day clerk will not check because he is home asleep and the paper will be filed by morning. The ghost workers ride the numbers. If the pool grows, an extra name can be added to the bonus list without anyone on the crew complaining, provided the envelope for the ghost can be collected by a man who speaks like a clerk and leaves town before the sun hits the tracks. The signature for the envelope needs to match the call sheet. The call sheet needs to match a name that looks real when the company auditor glances at it. A household proof from the studio clipped to a dependence form in a file can make a name look like a man with responsibilities. A postmaster's stamp on a mail certificate can make Cedar Street look like a street. Merritt keeps his extra book because the scale's printed tape cannot hold suspicion. He writes down car numbers, gross weights, and little marks that only he understands. A dot for a shaved tear, a dash for a reweigh done without a reason, a hook for the Perry Y that is not spelled that way anywhere except on envelopes and tickets after midnight. He adds a separate column for the times the telegraph key clicks a code the yard calls black ribbon, an operator-to-operator shorthand that flags a funeral run, a slow order for a car with mourners or a coffin riding in the baggage. Black ribbon means the church will ring in the morning and the town will be quiet in the afternoon. He copies every black ribbon he handles into the book beside the weight tickets. Then he starts noticing the gap. On 3 nights across 6 weeks, the key says black ribbon from the division office for a short consist scheduled to stop for 15 minutes at Ledger Run for water. The orders are clear. The conductor is to proceed at reduced speed through the town and avoid switching on the main. Merritt acknowledges, logs the time, and writes the initials of the dispatcher. The next mornings, the church bell does not ring. The pastor's board posted on the front gate shows no service. The sexton does not cut new sod. The telegraph says funerals. The town says nothing. He adds a new mark to his book, a small square drawn beside the time. Black ribbon, no bell. He does not start with theory. He starts with paper he can touch. The scales printer punches a repeatable 6-toothed notch on the edge of every ticket. If a ticket is reprinted, the notch looks different because the roll does not line up the same. He lines 3 tickets on his desk with the same car number, 3 different nights. The notch falls in the exact same place. The only way to make that happen is to print the 3 tickets in one go and hold them, filling in dates later. He files the 3 together with a string and draws another square in the book. The operator's lamp throws a low circle in the shack. Men step into it, sign without looking up, and leave with envelopes when the yardmaster hands them out. The ghost envelopes go to the clerk-voiced man with the neat hook. Merritt notices his coat, the Sunday type from the studio trunk. He notices that the man smells of carbolic rather than coal. He notices that on nights when black ribbon clicks, the man appears 10 minutes before the water stop and stands where he can see the main line without being seen from the depot window. He notices that when black ribbon clears and the short consist rolls through, the baggage door stays shut. Merritt knows better than to ask questions at the edge of a lantern's light. He writes a line in the margin of his book instead. BB at 2:17, no bell at 8 Sowis, envelope signed at 8:10 by hook hand, scale tape pre-torn. He takes the day's printed tapes at dawn and puts them under the blotter for the day clerk to tally. Then he pulls one from last week to compare. The ink imprint of the digits is too clean for a night in a damp shack. Someone is keeping blank tickets dry somewhere else. The scale is not the only machine that can be tuned. The telegraph office keeps a message book with carbons, sent messages, received messages, initials for who copied them. The division dispatcher's handwriting is distinct even when transmitted. He uses long dashes in place of dots when in a hurry, a habit that makes operators complain because it slurs across characters. On 2 of the black ribbon nights, the dashes in the book are crisp, not slurred. Someone has copied the message backward into the book after the fact from a cleaned copy rather than off the wire. Merritt marks the margins. The book is supposed to be the town's hearing of the outside world. On those nights, the hearing is a performance. Payroll arrives in sealed bundles on Fridays. The yardmaster takes them into the office and calls names. Men come in pairs and groups, and the envelopes vanish into oilcloth coats. The ghost names are called when the group is thin and the hallway is noisy. The hook-handed signature appears for Eli Paris, for J. Ellery Crew, for Hartwell Relief, none of which are on the day shift rosters. The yardmaster says the night pool runs separate and shrugs. He does not know the names the way Abel Hart knows the names. He does not go to church often enough to notice the absence of bells after Black Ribbon. He does not buy cabinet cards. Merritt tries to prove the fraud the way a telegrapher proves a message, by checking the originating point. He sends an after-hours query up the line on a night when Black Ribbon is expected, phrased as a courtesy. Confirm BB special consist and consist count. The reply comes with a delay. The count is 2 cars short of what passes through in front of his lamp. He notes the timestamps, the division clock and his clock match within a minute. He cannot make the numbers lie to each other. He adds 2 little triangles in his book next to the squares and the hooks. New mark, new problem. Extra cars, no bell. The girl with the chipped tooth runs errands between the studio, the post office, and the yard on days when Wren can spare her and the weather allows. She appears at the scale shack doorway one evening before dusk with a folded paper from Abel Hart. It is a registry memorandum copy listing letters held for pickup under 3 surnames and a note in Abel's neat block hand. Compare to your hook signatures. Merritt does not show irritation that the postmaster knows about his marks. He unfolds the memorandum and sees the corner X pencil strokes he thought were private. Abel writes a single line under the list. A name is a weight when it sticks to paper. Your beam measures both. The 2 men do not meet to share this. They leave things where the other will find them. Merritt leaves a weight ticket in Abel's locked mail slot with a hook drawn in the margin. Abel leaves a torn envelope with 2 surnames written in the same hand on Merritt's key hook. The exchanges are small and plain. They build a picture that looks nothing like the proofs in the studio window. It looks like the rim of a sealed car and the habit of a man to stand where he can see a black ribbon roll through with no one on the platform. A week later, the beam on the scale sticks high and stays there. The iron arm under the deck will not settle, even with the levers smacked hard. Merritt looks under the platform with the lantern and finds a wedge of oak hammered between the fulcrum and the sill. The wedge is stained with oil to make it look like old freight had seeped into it. It is fresh. It would lift every gross by the same neat amount and make every net generous. He pries it free and pockets it. He makes a note in his book, wedge, oak, oil cent, raises by 180. He runs the next 3 cars without the wedge, and the numbers fall back to what his ear says is right. He moves the wedge into a drawer and does not tell the yardmaster. He wants to see who will ask why the pool is light this week. No one asks. The hook-handed man does not show that Friday. The bonus pool envelopes, when opened, are smaller. Men swear and spit and then get on with the afternoon because the weather looks like snow. The envelope for Eli Paris Crew is returned to the drawer with a rubber band around it for next Friday. Merritt writes the ticket numbers that fed that envelope on a scrap and slides it into his extra book. He carries the oak wedge to the telegraph table and sets it where he can see it when the key starts to click the evening orders. When Black Ribbon comes that night, the dispatcher uses the slurred dashes that mark a live send. The short consist pulls for water. Merritt steps out with the lantern and keeps his eyes on the baggage car's vent. No breath of winter comes out. No steam. If there is a coffin, it is empty. If there are mourners, they are in the day coaches with the curtains down. which is not how people travel to a funeral when they want a town to see their grief. The baggage door remains shut. The train pulls out. The key clicks a clear block. The church is dark in the morning. He spends the next week collecting small pieces. A duplicate waybill with 2 different ink colors on the same line. A tear plate screw with fresh scrape marks. A conductor's stub that lists a car that the division said was in repair in another town. He pulls the night operator's message book for the past 2 months and circles the initials of the dispatcher who always works when the hook-handed man appears. He checks the daybook at the studio and finds a receipt paid in cash by a surname that only exists on wait tickets. He copies the chipped R with his finger and thinks about how stamps make people blind. Merritt crosses his own line when he opens the yardmaster's bottom drawer at noon and lifts the payroll call sheet. He expects a simple list. He finds names grouped in 3s with a line linking them and a note in pencil. Proof okay. He knows what the note means without asking. Someone brings cabinet cards to a railroad office and lays them on a desk to vouch for men who do not stand for roll call. The yardmaster is not inventing anything. He is copying from a file that makes fraud look like procedure. Merritt puts the sheet back where it was and closes the drawer without a sound. On the last page of his extra book, he writes a clean set of lines. Weights that moved money. Names that took envelopes. Black ribbons that did not raise bells. Tickets printed in batches. A wedge that lifted every car by the right amount to make a ghost envelope worth the walk. He does not accuse. He arranges. When a system is built of little honest-looking parts, the only way to see it is to line the parts where the light falls the same on each. He tears the page out and folds it into the inside cover of a telegraph codebook, where no one will look unless they already know. The snow finally comes on a night when the hook-handed man returns to the platform before dawn. He signs for 2 envelopes, glances at the lamp, and steps toward the main to watch for a consist that the dispatcher's book does not list. Merritt sees the coat, the Sunday type, the careful hat. He sees the scales roll already torn off to the same notch as last Tuesday. He sees the baggage car door latch turned down, although the car should be empty. He adjusts the lantern so the light falls where it always falls, on the edge of the ticket pad and the nail that holds the chalk. The man reaches for the envelopes and thanks him with a voice that could pass for any office in any town. The telegraph key clicks 3 slow dashes that are not part of any code. The baggage car rolls past without a breath of steam. The church bell rope hangs still. The census man arrived with a pencil so sharp it squeaked. He wore a city coat and country boots and introduced himself as Randolph Pike, United States enumerator for the district, oath filed with the clerk. He was the kind of orderly that makes other men nervous. He started at the depot because that is where you can tell whether a town is a train stop with shacks or a place with a grid in its bones. He opened his black field book, wrote Ledger Run at the top, and drew a square for Cedar Street. He asked the rail agent which way Cedar Street ran. The agent pointed toward a fence line and said, "That way when the ground is dry." Pike worked by doors, not by stories. He knocked. He asked for names in full, ages as of last birthday, relation to head of household, occupation in plain words. He did not accept help as an occupation unless the person could say where. He did not accept same as last time for ages because he had last time in his satchel. He carried the pages from the previous enumeration folded in thirds, and he checked them against whatever someone tried to give him at the threshold. The first oddity was ordinary in appearance. 2 houses with the same head of household, spelled the same, ages identical, 2 blocks apart. When he read the names out loud, both families nodded at each one. The children's months of birth matched. The woman at the first door said a cousin lived on the other street and used their surname for the school form, which happens sometimes when cousins are raised together. Pike wrote both households as they answered and marked a small circle in the margin of each line. Circles were for households that would need verification by other means. He did not say out loud what those means were. At the third house on Cedar Street, if you accept that the line of yards with scrap ties and 2 fences equaled a street, the family proof was already on the table when he entered, a cabinet card under a saucer. He recognized the studio stamp at a glance. He also recognized the chipped R in Run from a dozen other towns that had bought their proofs from the same hand. He asked their ages without looking at the picture. The father recited. The mother recited. The aunt hesitated long enough to tell him she was not an aunt. He watched how the daughter looked at the floor when the word relation left his mouth. He did not argue. He filled the lines and drew a circle in the margin. He took the proofs when people offered them. He put them into a portfolio labeled supporting documents and did not promise to return them. When he turned the proofs over, he saw Abel Hart's small staple holes through church and school cards, a habit no postal regulation had written and no church bylaw had allowed. He did not write a complaint about the postmaster. He wrote a note to himself. Documents anchored to photographs. Photographs anchored to nothing that shows a date except a studio ledger I do not have. He used 3 cross-checks the town could not see. First, a school roll call. Teachers keep cleaner numbers than pastors because the county pays by head count, and a child not present on paper does not draw any chalk. The roll listed 29 children in term, 3 absent to care for kin, 2 removed to another town. Pike matched surnames to houses. He counted the same boy twice under different surnames in 2 classes with the same handwriting on both entries. He drew a square in his book beside the surname and wrote, "Duplicate as pupil." Second, the company payroll list for night work, which he did not ask the yardmaster for. He waited until midday when the office cleared for lunch. Then he asked the night operator, Merritt Cole, what names were called for envelopes after sundown. Merritt did not hand over any list. He turned his extra book so the light lay on the margins and let Pike see the hooks, squares, triangles. Pike did not ask what the symbols meant. He understood well enough when he heard the word black ribbon and saw there were no dates of service at the church to match it. He wrote, "Earnings claimed by men no one sees by day," in the margin of his own book. Third, the postmaster's memorandum. Pike asked no favors at the counter. He bought a money order blank for 10 cents and slid a folded card back with it. Abel Hart glanced down, saw the federal seal on the card, and brought the registry memoranda without ceremony. The memoranda showed names that received in bursts and then vanished, corner X marks that recurred, and addresses for a street that did not touch any survey map. Pike copied numbers, not arguments. He made a column of surnames that lived by mail and another of those that lived by habit. The lists only overlapped in a few places. Those places mattered. He began to test what was true. He picked a simple claim. The widow who said her sister and lending aunt lived with her. He returned at dawn when the factory whistle 3 towns over could be heard if the wind was right. He knocked. The widow answered with a coat thrown over her shoulders. The sister was not there. The aunt was there, but she had a laundry pail in her hand and a customer's address chalked on her sleeve. Pike asked the aunt to say her full name. She said 3 different surnames in 12 seconds and ended with the one printed on the studio backing board. He wrote the last one because it matched the school register the child had used and circled the other 2 so he would not be fooled when he saw them again. When people tried to help him by guiding him to the right answers, he made them slow down. A man volunteered his birthday before the question reached his throat. Pike asked him to fetch a Bible and show where the date was written. The Bible had a clipping and no ink. He wrote the year with a question mark. In another house, the family said the old woman on the chair was 78 and the same year born as the liveryman's mother across the spur. Pike wrote her age and then asked her to name the president when she first voted. She laughed and said she had never voted, which placed her in a different age altogether. He did not correct them at the door. He drew a circle, marked Reconcile, and moved on. He kept a separate sheet titled Households Claimed, Households Found. He marked the studio's token poses when he saw them framed on walls. The cradle right, the elder seated, the neighbor seated with the couple behind. When 3 unrelated houses in a row had token 3 on display, he wrote, Casting. When 2 households carried the same cabinet cards smudged in different corners, he wrote, 1 plate, 2 proofs. He did not ask C. Baxter for his ledger because he knew how a man who rents relatives claims privacy. He made a note to look for the assistant's handwriting on receipts instead. L. Wren's hand slanted the same way on every slip, and sometimes her notes took pity on his work. Repeat light for release. Same shawl with niece, token 12. He copied the phrases and did not hide that he had seen them. By the end of the first week, his book held a map the town would not draw for itself. Duplicate heads. Children doubled. A street that could be found by the mail and by no other instrument. A studio that supplied faces and props to seal claims. A scale that printed proof for envelopes that fattened a bonus pool and fed names that could not be found at dinner. He could have closed his book and written a cold report to the district marshal. He did not. He started at the bridge instead. The old bridge locals, called the Gateway, had been closed one summer by the county and left to rot because nobody would own the repairs. In the ledger that Pike carried from the clerk, the bridge had a party recorded in 1900, a photograph of the ribbon cutting, a list of families in attendance, names of donors carved on a plank now long gone. Pike read the names out loud on the plank's list. Eli Paris, J. Ellery, Hartwell, Lyle, the same chain that ran through the post office and the scale shack. He asked the oldest men where the photograph of the bridge opening hung. They pointed to the depot. The depot had a framed print with the chipped R. He took the frame down and turned the backing. The penciled note read, Token 7, repeat light on shawl. He set the frame against the wall and wrote, Party vanished, picture staged, in his book. Verification is patient, not dramatic. He sent for copies of land plats from the county seat and traced where Cedar Street would be if the town ever paid for a survey. He wrote to the Children's Aid Society and asked, with the imprimatur of the census, for the original placement records for Thomas Lyle, later Elias Paris. The reply came with a polite note. Record shows ledger run, Guardian Paris, photograph on file. He asked for the photograph. The photograph bore the chipped R. He sent a return letter that asked for dates of subsequent welfare inquiries. The reply listed none. He wrote, Paper satisfied itself in the margin and doubled the circle beside the boy's name in his book. He walked the route at different hours. He stood where the night operator stood and listened for the black ribbon dashes and counted the bells that never rang. He attended church twice and sat in the back pew where he could watch who used which name to greet whom. The laundress said Miss Wren to L. Wren, which told him who collected the faces and who ran them. The brakeman, who looked like a grandfather in the studio images, prayed under his own name and never claimed a discount at the counter. Pike wrote the brakeman's name without a circle. The rest grew a forest of ink. In the third week, he began field verifications that no one in town could block. He selected 10 households with studio proofs used to anchor multiple forms. He requested letters from 3 different agencies at once: school, church, and the rail company. He asked each agency to verify the same names in the same week so that the households could not keep 3 lies in the air at once. The letters came back with a pattern. The school used one surname, the church used a second. The company had a file with a third stapled to a dependence card under a cabinet stamp. He wrote all 3 down in 3 columns and drew lines to show how a single person's life had been pulled across paper like a rope stretched to keep 2 poles from falling. When he finally returned to the studio door, it was not to accuse. It was to purchase the ledger. He carried $30 in federal cash, which, in a town like Ledger Run, might as well have been a fortune. He asked for books rather than plates. Baxter looked at the money and then at L. Wren. Wren did the math that men do not like to do in public. $30 would cover the studio rent for 2 months and pay off the debt on a lens she wanted. She brought out the sequence book and the receipt ledger. Pike paid for copies, not originals, and asked only to sit with them for 1 hour while she watched. He copied dates, token numbers, and surnames matched to plate numbers. He asked her to read a single line out loud: "Repeat shawl with niece." She read it without lowering her eyes. He asked what the niece's name was. She said, "It depends on who is hungry." He wrote her answer in his book without underlining it. He left the studio and walked to the post office. He set his notes on the counter and told Abel Hart what he would write in his return. Abel did not flinch. He took out the skeleton drawer and placed it on the counter. The drawer contained broken plates, the corner X letters, the certificate book that was not a real form, and a stack of cabinet cards stapled to school registers. Abel said he had anchored names so the children would not wash away. Pike said he understood and flipped to the page where the boy had 2 surnames in the same term. Abel nodded and said he would stop stapling any proof that did not match a teacher's role. Pike wrote, "Corrective action promised," without promising anything back. On the last day, he visited the churchyard with the sexton. He carried the list of funeral specials that had passed through as black ribbon without bells. The sexton said there were no interments on those dates, but there had been inquiries. Could a burial be noted after the fact if a family produced a photograph of the mourners? The sexton had said no. Pike asked whether any photograph had been left for him to keep with the book of burials. The sexton said one had, but he did not hang it because no one in it wore grief. Pike asked to see it. The photograph had the chipped R. The faces were composed rather than broken. The date penciled on the backing did not match the telegraph book. He took the photograph for his portfolio and wrote, "Mourning staged for paper release only." He wrote his return in the depot office where he could see the tracks and the door to the scale shack and the studio window with the girl in the braid smiling out at nobody in particular. The report was not a raid. It was a request for a supplemental enumeration and a federal note to the division office recommending an audit of night pool procedures and ticket stock. He laid out the chain plainly. Rented relatives and photographs produced proofs. Proof stapled to multiple forms made names stick. Names that stick permit envelopes to be drawn for work that did not exist. Black ribbon used as a cover to move cars that were not in any book. A bridge party that never occurred used to cement a town's founding narrative. He did not use the word conspiracy. He wrote system. Before he left, he went to Cedar Street and knocked one last time at the house where the boy answered to 2 surnames. The boy came to the door with school books bound in twine. Pike asked him how the teacher called the roll that week. The boy said, "Elias." Pike wrote Elias with no circle and put his pencil away. He asked the boy if he would sit for a photograph for the census clerk's card, which was a real form and not a studio proof. The boy stood straight, and Pike took out a small folding camera he kept for field identifications. He made one exposure in the yard without props or shawls or tokens and wrote the date on the back in ink that would not fade. He handed the boy a copy cut from the second contact and told him to keep it safe. On the platform, the night operator handed him a folded scrap torn from an extra book page. It had a list of weight tickets with hooks and squares and triangles, and a final line that said, "Wedge." Pike put the scrap with the studio notes and the churchyard photograph. He tore a blank from the back of his own book and wrote 3 clean lines for Merritt to keep. No more blank tickets stored. Tear checks at dawn. Black ribbon acknowledged by Bell, or not at all. Merritt read the lines and tucked them under his blotter. As the eastbound pulled in, Pike closed his black book and tested the pencil point with his thumb. It was still sharp. He had one more visit to make at the county seat, and then a ride to the division office to hand his report rather than mail it. He stepped onto the coach and set the portfolio on the seat beside him. Outside the window, the studio's window display caught a square of afternoon light. The same crack curved behind the girl's shoulder like a small river. The train bell rang once and fell quiet. He looked at the photograph of the bridge party and circled the date in his book a final time. He could not make it match anything that had actually happened.